to mirror the motions that are coming to full council on the 12th. I think you'll agree with both of them.
Okay, we are now live.
Thank you.
Chairman, we're live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee. I'm Councillor Julian Spence, and I'm the chair of this committee. We've got various officers with us tonight. Briefly, if you just introduce yourselves.
Absolutely. So my name is Rosie Plaistow. I'm Financial Services Manager.
I'm Richard Bates, the Section 151 officer.
And sorry, I can click on it.
Yeah, I'm AJ from Grand Thornton and I'm the Week Manager. Excellent.
Good, thank you very much. Members and officers, so I should add, we also are graced for the presence of the leader.
Thank you,
Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Yes.
Chairman, we also have Iona online as well.
Okay, sorry, I apologise. Yep. Could I ask any members or indeed officers who wish to speak just to raise their hands? And if anyone is online, keep your mic on mute when you're not speaking. We have a fairly lengthy agenda, but I would ask that you keep your questions brief and to the point. And of course, as this meeting is being webcast, if there is an interruption in the cast, we'll have to adjourn until that connection is re-established. So if we can first go to the agenda. Apologies for absence. So do we have any, Kimberly?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Conor Rennell has apologised.
Okay, thank you. I'd also just make the observation I've had apologies from Robin Taylor, who's one of the officers who's unable to make today, but he's given me a very brief report, which I shall read out at the right moment. Item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on 11th of September and published on the council's website. Could I have any questions or comments on that? If not, would someone like to propose to approve those minutes?
Approve.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Minutes approved. Thank you. Item 3, disclosure of interests. Do any members have any interests that wish to declare? Or Kimberly, have you got any?
I haven't received any, Chair.
So, hearing no disclosures. Questions by members of the public. Kimberly, do we have
none?
None?
None received, Chair.
And indeed, questions from members.
None received, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll move to item number 6, somewhat euphemistically, I think, headed WBC 2023 planning inquiries. I think this originates from Councillor Beeman's request back in September. Wow. When we were, I think you were troubled certainly by the staffing issues in the planning department.
What was that time? Curious.
Yeah. And that time, although the ONS committee was, I think we agreed that sort of the prime committee to look at the details of that. This was, from our perspective, whether there were any particular HR risk areas that should be addressed or had been addressed, or were there any concerns from that? But Councillor Beeman, is that?
Well, I'm pretty sure there's no fully staffed, I believe, actually. Yeah. So, but having said that, I mean, the only danger is, of course, that there's a lot of agency staff there, and people who live quite a long way from Waverley, actually, in staffing that department. I think there was one who was in Milton Keynes, and somebody was in Stansted, and that gives potential risk because I don't actually know the local area, actually. But I mean, I'm quite happy at the moment, so I mean, I think the new head of planning has done a good job, actually, so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a list sent round recently of names of people that are now currently in planning, and I did request
In answer to that, I asked if we could be told how many were actually employed by Waverley and how many of the people were agency staff, because I think that is a good risk. The agency staff, or a bad risk, I should say. Agency staff can leave tomorrow. And, we're losing the background knowledge, which I think is one of the biggest problems we have, the background knowledge not being kept in the department. But I didn't get an answer. So I think that's something we ought to be made aware of, is how many of these members of staff are employed under HR. I mean, that must be very difficult for them because they've no idea. And also, what is the additional cost? You're paying agency staff an awful lot more money than you would for an employed person.
To my mind, that's a good point. It's not one that's exclusive to planning.
No.
But I think it's the broader issue,
Yeah.
and that's perhaps why I think this committee with Risk Hat comes into play, is how does the council address the risks associated with temporary staff?
It's not easy to hear, but I mean, all the councils have got similar problems. And there's a shortage of planning staff in the council. Very difficult.
I think this is across the board, lots of councils are suffering from this. I don't think it's Waverley on their own, but I do think it is a risk for a council.
A couple of things on that theme, if I may. I've seen the resources committee is actually set up a subcommittee or working group, rather than subcommittee, to look at this issue of staffing and how it could be better addressed or resourced. I'm jumping ahead, if I may.
Of course.
Because I want to make a note from this subject. It would be nice if, to my mind, if the staffing risk was included in the governance statement as one of the things which has changed or emerged more strongly over the last 12 months. But we'll pick that up later on, if I may.
Absolutely, good. A good point. Councillor Reid.
Chair, I don't really think that we can manage the scarcity of staff. All we can do is to ensure that we have the processes in place to address that when it happens. Because if someone wants to move somewhere else for more money, we can't really prevent that. But we do need to have the processes in place. So it's more about ensuring that the processes are there than trying to pretend that we can actually influence whether staff stay with us, other than treating them correctly, of course.
Indeed, and I think you're right, this committee is more interested, is the process there of the appropriate controls and mechanisms being used. So I don't think we need to tread on ONS's sort of toes on that. I think what I'd like to see is, at the time when we look at our risk register, how that deals with these sort of staffing issues. That should also address the sort of the ownership, who is responsible for the staffing, and the sort of process that they go through.
I agree with Councillor Reid. You can't make people stay anywhere. The only difference is if they're employed, they have to give notice, which gives you time. The difference with having agency staff is they could just not turn up tomorrow.
Yeah.
So that is the difference, and that's the risk that we're putting ourselves under.
Sorry, I have on the screen, Kimberly.
Thank you. Just to answer the question about how many staff, the list that I was given in August was 9 agency and 6 permanent.
Heavily weighted.
And we've had a few changes since then. Yeah.
So from
Chair, it may be that we need to ensure that we do have good processes in place to ensure that we retain the staff that we do have. But that's general across the board, and I know that the leaders talked about it a lot in the past, that we need to be aware that we are dealing with people and we need to treat them right, etc.
Would the committee think it, sorry.
I'm sorry to labour the point, but I agree with you, Ken, entirely. It's the working environment, and since we had COVID, of course, lots of people started working from home, which is fantastic. But it doesn't suit everyone. And I think, although I think Paul has actually said to me, and the people that have left, nobody has said I'm going because I have to work from home. No. But speaking to people in other places apart from Waverley, I know there is a problem people are finding with working from home. They don't have the camaraderie of going to work and having people around them that they can converse with and help them, because especially if you're new in a position, you spend a long time as a new person in a position gathering the information from others that are around you. And it could be one of the reasons why we lose staff now, because it wasn't like this pre-COVID. So the change I see has happened is the working from home and not actually all coming in together to work and talk about something around the coffee machine.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Fowles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reflecting on a little bit of that, a lot of this is also about the offering, the package that we can offer to staff. And in some cases, we just can't compete with the private sector. That is often straight up the main issue. And particularly if you can be a planning officer and work in the north of England at roughly the same salary that you're on now, your cost of living is going to be better. And what we have seen is quite a few people do that. So some of this is about managing staff that you already have. Some of it is about the offering that we go out to new staff. And just to reflect finally on that, on the point about working from home or not, it's be very difficult for almost any role, and we've seen this with other areas that we've gone out for. If we removed working from home as a component of that offer, I imagine our applications these days would drop through the floor for nearly every role that we're talking about, because there's an expected part of the package for some level of work from home. However we might feel about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, most applicants expect it to be somewhere in the package. So I would just ask the committee to look at it from that perspective as much as whether they approve of or disapprove of the idea of working from home. It's an expected part of the package nowadays.
Just sort of trying to draw this to a close. Obviously conscious that the ONS is doing something. You know, we're tasked with inquiries of management of areas of concern or risk. I would posit that it may be a good idea to ask the head of HR to come to one of our next meetings and to briefly speak through the processes, the controls that they have, so that we can get the assurance that staffing matters generally, the sort of matters that you've raised, working from home and others, are being addressed, and we have the right, we have processes in place. As I think you've all said, at the end of the day, we can't sort of lock staff in, but we can try and make it as a helpful and friendly place to work as possible. Would members of the committee agree with that?
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that as something to be followed up. Thank you. If I move on to risk management, as I mentioned, Robert Taylor sent his apologies. He sent me a brief note to update, unless one of the other officers present was going to comment on his behalf. So if I just briefly tell you what he's told me, he said that we will recall that in the presentation he gave at the last meeting, there was a gap in officer resource about risk management, and that was inhibiting progress. He says, I've now agreed a plan with the Council's Corporate Management Board, and I'm pleased to confirm that Grace Da Costa, the Council's graduate trainee, will be providing support on risk management in the short term. She will work with me and others to revise the strategic risk register, and we'll also look at the other actions in the audit plan, including putting in place a risk strategy for the Council. In the longer term, I've agreed that when I recruit further performance and strategy officers into the Waverley team, that one of these will lead on risk management for WVC. So that's the update on that. I would make the observation, I think I'm encouraged that we've now got somebody who's going to be actually looking at this. Also that Robin has recognised that maybe having a graduate trainee is not the level of seniority or gravitas that is, I think, needed from a risk officer to challenge other officers and, you know, at the most senior level, and to work with them. But I certainly welcome that development.
Yeah. Thanks, Chairman. Obviously, this is an area that myself and Councillor Keel have taken a keen interest in and have been working alongside you to progress some of this. We also have a task and finish group of the Guildford Waverley Governance Group to refine the strategic risk register for the two councils. My hope is that will provide a better structure that we can then use for a new strategic risk register for Waverley. So my hope is we can get that into a good state. I entirely agree with you that it's good that we've got this kicked off, but somebody actually challenging on risk will probably need to be somebody senior in the longer run, because it just won't get the traction it needs to get. Otherwise, you know from your past experience, as do I, that it does tend to need to be somebody with some seniority to push those things. So absolutely on the same page as you. Rather strangely, I've been doing informal interviews with people interested in the Joint Chief Executive job over the last 2 weeks, and we're in the process of actually having to have a short list for those because we had so many applicants, which was quite a pleasant surprise. And about half of those applicants picked up on our absence of a risk management strategy, and many of them decided to furnish me with the strategies of their current councils. So I have a large wad of these, including structures and proposed processes from 5 or 6 other district authorities, which I'll share with you, Chairman, because there's probably some good practice lurking amongst them.
Excellent. And I'm certainly encouraged by that, because the culture, as they say, comes from the top, and as you select a new CEO, having someone who has risk management high on their list is something I
took it as a good sign as well, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions on risk? So I think hopefully we will wait and then maybe by the next meeting have a more detailed register and policy to get our teeth into. Thank you. So on to item 8. Lucy, is that going to be you on inquiries of management?
So, Chairman, Councillors, you'll find in your agenda pack quite a lengthy document, which is some information that the council provides to Grant Thornton as our external auditors for their risk planning, for them to be able to focus resources when working through the audit process. So we actually have the pleasure of AJ this evening as well. So this document is a template that Grant Thornton provide, and for a number of years now we have provided answers in the management response column within this document, and that has been done internally in the past. And last year, I believe we had the previous audit chair sign off, but now we have are bringing it to the committee for review, for comment, and so that this document can get minuted, so that Grant Thornton can use this document in their audit process. So I don't intend on going through all the items because it's quite a lengthy document. But if anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, happy to hand it out to the group.
Thank you, Rosie. Any questions, Councillor Reid?
It's just one of understanding. If you turn to page 30, Accounting Estimates, General Inquiries of Management. What was it? So the second section down on I have a printed document, so it's not the grey, it's the white one, and it says, "Why are management satisfied?" And the answer is yes. I think there's a superfluous why there, but what, if it isn't superfluous, I don't understand.
I hope it's a superfluous why.
So I spent 5 minutes trying to work out what are they saying, and then I realised that we've got a superfluous word. So,
I hadn't spotted that. I applaud you for your
All my queries,
eagerly with some diligence.
all my queries are this easy.
That would make the answer rather more appropriate.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know the answer to this one, but still am confused by it. On page 32, right at the top, it says yes. So there's been a change in accounting method in the year. Yes. Should we know what that is, or should we be worried about what it is, or should we know the detail?
Depreciation, so yes, there was a change in the let me think, to the way that HMO depreciation is applied. So we have moved to a straight line basis for over 60 years for our council dwellings. That was partially a decision over simplification of calculation of depreciation over our assets. We did some work behind that to work out what the difference was from our original calculations, and it was minimal difference for, and it is an approved method of depreciation calculation. So it is an element of time saving, efficiency within the finance team, with minimal impact on the valuations in our asset register. But yes, noted that it would have been more helpful to include what that change was in the documentation.
Sure, yes. In the back of my mind, I do remember reading that somewhere, so it may well be in this document, and I just haven't linked the two together. But would have been easier perhaps to have a link to say this is where it is. But okay, but I do remember reading.
And I believe, although I would probably want confirmation that was discussed in one of the audit committees last year. It rings bells with me, that discussion. It's the sort of thing I would have expected you to have raised, and I think you did. But your point well taken. Before we go, just really a question of Grant Thornton. You know, we and officers put this together. We look at it. I've looked at this previously. From the type of inquiries and management that you get, is this what you expect? Is this helpful to you? Are there any areas you can say, well, actually, you might want to be digging deeper in this to help you?
Thanks for the question. I will explain the process. So initially, I think a couple of years ago, we will ask the questions simply to the management and send the inquiries out to the management and receive the inquiries and review it. And based off of that review, we will do our risk assessment. I think since last 2 years, we also want the audit committee, especially the chair, basically those charged with governance, to also review the inquiry and the responses that the management have given. And then if they make any changes or have any questions. So this way we get the buy-in from the management as well as from the those charged with governance that these responses are correct. And then we review them. For example, we picked up on depreciation. We will also review this, and if there's anything that we think indicates that we have to change our audit approach, we will then amend that in the way we do the strategy for the audit. But yeah, that's the process.
Yeah, and for the other members of the committee, Rosie and I went through this earlier, and I had some suggestions which you took up. So you require from the committee, therefore, to sign off on this report, as it were. So if I can have a motion or
Do these incorporate your amendments?
approve. The amendments were incorporated in what you've already had. So there was an earlier version that I see. So our members of the committee are happy to approve this report.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rosie, for putting that together. So on to the grant reporting audit plan for 23 to 24. And flies, but I'm very pleased that we're talking the future rather than the past.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to present the audit plan for 22-23. I will, obviously, I appreciate there are a number of pages in the report, so I take the report as read. And I will go through the key items that is around the key themes for the audit. That includes significant risk and also the timelines. And once I'm done, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take any questions on the report. So the report starts on page 37 of the bundle of the pack. And then the key areas I wanted to pick up was on page 42, where the significant 2023 audit is explained. So we've identified 4 areas as significant risk. When we say significant risk, we intend to do more detailed work around it. That includes understanding the process and controls, and also then doing substantive testing, which is the detailed audit work. That is around management override of controls, which includes all the work over journal and also understanding the system. Evaluation of land and building, including council dwellings. This is also including the valuation of investment properties. This is the same as last year, so there's no change in significant risk, and also the work that we will do around valuations. Also evaluation of net pensions liability. This will include understanding process and also doing detailed audit work on it. These are the 4 significant risks. Then these have also been explained in the following pages, and we've talked about the procedures that we intend to perform over them. The key thing I want to bring up on the same page, that is the new accounting standard, the new auditing standard. So as you must have read about it, ISO 315 is the new auditing standard that has been introduced a couple of years ago, and is applicable on all audit firms where they need to do this work on IT for all the audits. That includes public, private, all the sectors. So we will need to understand the IT processes around the systems that the council uses, and that will include the ledger system. You will find the details later on in the report. Now I wanted to move on to the logistics, which is on page 64. The printed page might be different. 58, sorry. Yeah, I thought it would be good to discuss this. The timeline for the audit, as you must have heard about the backstop, and it might be 31st of March. So as a firm, we have tried to identify councils where we can deliver the audit in timeline, and Waverley is one of them. So we've started the risk assessment a couple of months ago, have been in touch with the finance team, and there were some capacity constraints within the finance team this time around. So we've paused the audit. We've selected all our samples and everything is with the finance team. We will come back on site to do the field work in January the 8th, and we will try to do the field work within the next 4 weeks. And hopefully we should be able to issue the deliverable, which is the audit opinion, the value for money work, before 31st of March 2024.
Very well.
If there are any questions?
Any questions?
The usual one, how are you on resources?
I think as a firm, we're quite nicely resourced. We have a team of qualified individuals and also a very large team of associates who are trainees to support our public sector.
So you feel confident we will not have a repeat of 2 years ago where you were very tight on staff?
We are quite committed to delivering audits on the councils that we've identified that we can successfully deliver. I think Waverley is one of them. So if we get the support from finance team, I don't see any issues in giving deliverables on time.
And we're okay on the finance team side, Rosie?
We'll make sure we are.
Oh, excellent.
Connected with resource, obviously the extra inquiries you're making of IT, which I see and value, are the IT team all up to speed and ready for this? I know that we are due ourselves to have a deep dive on data early in January. But are you comfortable with we have the right resource and right people in place?
Our IT team are, particularly Linda, our IT manager, is very knowledgeable and usually very quick at responding to audit requests. We have already submitted some of the early planning questionnaires for audit. So we also have a systems officer within the finance team.
Okay.
So some of it will fall into finance itself, not just the general IT. So we have a systems
I see that as
accountant.
important mainly because it's new and therefore everyone's going to be slightly finding their feet. So the more dedicated resource and commitment to it, the better. I think make everyone's life easier.
Thank you, Chair. I will take that away and make sure that comes as.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I could ask another question, it's more for my education. What is it that you are looking for to test and to prove in the IT systems?
So there are various IT systems in a council.
Oh,
Our audit is restricted to the key IT systems. That will be payroll. I mean, so the detail is
you mentioned payroll and
yeah.
accounting.
Yeah, on page 56 is aggressive, is payroll and ledger. So we will understand the process, and that will include the controls that the entity has. The controls the starting point initially will be the controls, which is from who has access, who can make changes, what are the password, what are the password requirements, when is the batch processing done, how is that done? Say, for example, if the system needs to be upgraded, what is the process? What are the loopholes, what can go wrong in a system? This is some of the things that I've talked about right now. The entire spectrum is a lot. There's a very long questionnaire that I've sent to Rosie, I think. Yeah. So, and that includes the process around starters, leavers, amendments, in and around access of IT. Sorry, I had a question.
So the overall management of change within the system.
Yeah, but not
and
just
the
limited to
interfaces
that.
which need to be run through.
Yeah,
okay,
and fine. And we will then also identify some of the controls that we think are relevant, and we will test those controls, and we'll indicate in our finance report whether.
It would be interesting, Chairman, if these kind of issues do come out when we have that deep dive you mentioned.
Yeah, which will indeed be before you return. So we get first challenging. Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Reid?
Chairman, thank you. This is really, from my understanding, as much as anything else, and that is you identify 4 items in the report, or the report identifies 4 items of significant risk. The thoughts I have are these significant risks because the factors that affect them are really very difficult to control and outside the control generally of any organisation, and therefore that's why it is a significant risk? Or is it that actually we could control it, but there's something we're not doing that we should be doing to reduce that risk?
So there's audit concept around significant risk, which includes whether these areas have an inherent risk, and the other thing is, what if these go wrong? Will they have a material impact on the accounts, which will be an impact to the reader of the statement? The values of these 4 areas are quite large. So if something were to be wrong by 5%, it would be quite a material change. Therefore, in terms of impact, they require greater deal of attention.
Thank you. Thank you. I personally find it slightly challenging the clearly trivial amounts. I understand it from an audit perspective, but for me, £78,000 is not it's not clearly trivial. But I appreciate what you're putting there. Good. Thank you very much. I don't think we have to make any approvals or motions on this, but thank you and good luck, and we look forward to the end of March.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 10, the annual governance statement. This is the interim review and consideration of governance issues. This is something, a standing item that we have each meeting and then approve it once a year for them. Councillor Davison, just to come back to your point, that we should include something here. I think we
On page 74, yes. I think you've answered some of the response. We've answered some of the response earlier on, that it is an issue. HR, as I think leaders pointed out, are addressing this. But it is an ongoing concern, and as Councillor Gale has pointed out, we are losing skills, and every time you take on somebody new in an agency, there's a learning curve, and that costs. Yeah.
Time is one of the things.
Well, and time.
Yeah.
And we don't want to get back into the situation, which is what Councillor Beeman has raised, where we are approaching government interference.
So really probably looking at page 74, changes of governance during the year, something under the planning threat of designation following on from that.
Yes. Well, I think it's, as Councillor Gale pointed out, it's more than just planning stuff, it's other skilled areas. I think finance was mentioned at an earlier meeting I attended, so that we're all suffering across those where we need to have skilled individuals.
May I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that rather couching this specifically under planning, I agree entirely with Councillor Davison that this is a wider issue. It's a few considerations. It's about the ability to offer a competitive package versus market equivalents, private sector equivalents. It's also about a general shortage of certain types of skills. Planning is one where there is just, even in the private sector, a shortage of the skills, so we can't get them, certainly at the prices we can pay. And I think the point that's been raised here, the ratio of agency to permanent staff, there are, I mean, it's not wholly negative agency staff, I would just add, but it is obviously a material factor that you're considering.
Thank you. So I think if we can ask officers to insert words to that bit, probably as not necessarily under 5.1, but I see significant operational events, other governance issues. It could come under one of those.
And indeed, it extends further because we are struggling, or have we filled the CFO position?
If I may, the CFO recruitment is still challenging, as you can imagine. There are a number of things that we can do to improve that. However, I certainly believe couching the role at a slightly different level is probably the first thing that I would seek to do. Certainly something Leader of Guildford and I have been talking about, and it's actually something that has come up again with the 8 or 9 people I've been informally speaking to as chief exec candidates too, who also want to have a look at that specifically if appointed. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing a far more robust, I think likely to be more successful process with the joint chief executive appointment. So hopefully we'll be able to get one moving by sorting out the other in this case.
So can I just ask the leader a question? Is it more difficult to recruit where we're trying to ride 2 horses? Do you think? Is it proving more challenging to find the people willing to take on like the dual role rather than a single?
So Rich might need to close his ears from this. We're finding that quite a lot of skilled people are taking the route of being interims because it's better conditions and pay.
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of a void in the market for people wanting to do it permanently. Where I think we are at the moment uncompetitive is that we are pitching the job at the wrong level. And in my opinion, it needs to be equal to one of the strategic directors rather than reporting into one of the strategic directors, so that it is more competitive. We would also put it up the salaries accordingly. And at that point, I think it would probably be worth considering separating out the head of finance executive head role, which is currently one with the section 151, into two elements, and having more financial governance at both Guildford and Waverley, I don't think would hurt at all anyway. So that is certainly where I would be taking it. And I suspect, from the conversations I've had with some of the candidates for the chief exec role, that many of them will be looking at doing something similar themselves.
Do you have a timescale in mind for the CEO?
Oh yes. So we've had enough applications that we actually have to do a shortlisting process on Wednesday, which I'm pleasantly surprised to be having to do. The Joint Appointments Committee is going to be meeting and interviewing the shortlisted candidates the week after. And I'm even being asked if council can consider having an extra session on December the 18th to appoint somebody, if we are of that mind. Bear in mind, I won't be there myself. I'm going to have to hand that over to Paul Peter Clark to shepherd through. We'll have to see, but I wouldn't want to impede the progress of that particular appointment because it is incredibly important. And if we were able to enter the new year with a confirmed candidate, I think that would be exceptional news.
That would be indeed. Can I also, are the candidates, do they have notice periods that they wouldn't be able to?
Some do, some don't. A handful of them are from councils that were unitarised out of existence and so don't have a notice period, come from Somerset. A few of them have interim arrangements with their current councils, so could depart. What I was discussing this morning with officers is the scenario where we're able to appoint somebody and hypothetically they can't start until, say, April the 1st.
Yeah.
Would we wish to appoint an interim for a couple of months or not? My gut feeling would be if it's kind of less than a quarter, I would not seek to do that, and I would seek to put the head of paid service with one of the three directors temporarily during that period, and not hire an interim. But it would depend on the timeframes. I am quite hopeful, though, considering some of the candidates that we may get maybe in the right place quite a lot quicker than I thought we would be.
Good.
I'm pleasantly surprised, I have to admit, Mr. Chairman. I was quite sceptical, as I know a number of you here were, but I've been pleasantly surprised by the process.
Encouraged by what you say, and I will clear my diary for the 18th of December.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any other questions or items people would like to raise for the statement? Councillor Davison.
I'm sorry, I'm seem to be raising all the questions. One minor item on the document. Will Mr. Horwood be signing off on page 18?
Very good question.
It might be through ANO or when
Yes.
somebody else.
So this will be signed alongside our audit, so that comes down to tight timescales.
Is it in March?
There could be a February audit committee.
It's just,
So it,
someone just needs to be careful of editing the document.
absolutely.
And I've got another question. It's a bit of a gripe, and our leader probably is very familiar with my gripe.
I know where you go.
Part of the principles, I think number 3 or 2 is number 2, ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement.
What page is that?
I'm sorry, on page 69, where you've got a summary of principles. My sense is that we need to be putting a little bit more into stakeholder engagement with our communities. Earlier than I think it possibly has been in the past. It's just more of a point to recognize, and it would be. Audit committee doesn't have a role in terms of advising executive, but I don't think in full, but it would be nice if that could be recognised amongst the executive in terms of the decisions they make, which have a direct impact on local communities.
Councillor Follows.
Firstly, can I say I do believe Audit Committee has certainly an informal role in advising the executive. It's one of the main reasons I'm here, because you're discussing many of the things certainly that is within my portfolio, and everyone has to sign the annual governance statement. So for me, I think it's fundamental that I hear the comments. One of the things that we've been doing is kicking off the Town and Parishes Forum, which we restarted again earlier last month. It has another session doing design codes in January. So we're trying to roll that out and keep that going. So there's engagement with the towns and parishes. So it's kind of back how it was before pandemic. In terms of other community engagement, I mean, we've got our water session, State of the Borough meeting on December the 8th, which I think is a bit of a grand experiment in many ways, certainly constitutionally it is. I don't think we've ever had one of those. But if there are any other suggestions for engagement with the community, please do let me know. Whether the Audit Committee has a formal role regarding the exec or not, it's important to hear what so.
There's been a lapse, and it's nice that
it's getting back slowly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Good, a good point. I had just a couple of things for the officers, they're fairly minor on the board. Page 76, the committee work programme for 23-24. We have apparently on today, we are actually looking at the annual Ripple report. It's not on our agenda. And actually, I think it was September last year that we last looked at one, so we probably need to have that on the next meeting, but it certainly shouldn't be on today's. And finally, on page 80, the level of assurance. We have a typo here on item 14. This AGS demonstrates systems controls continue to provide a comprehensive level of assurance to the council in its government arrangements during 22 to 23. I'm assuming that
Thank you.
should be just moved on.
Will do, thank you.
Good.
And the font in section 5.1 is in Arial. Sorry, Rosie.
Thank you.
Couldn't resist it.
Thank you. Kimberly, just one question for you. When do we sort of finalise on this annual government statement that we?
Sorry, I left my microphone up. I'm trying to remember when we actually do the final one. You know, don't you, Rosie? Yeah.
Absolutely. So we normally have this signed alongside the statement of accounts when the audit is completed.
Okay, so likely the March meeting will have the.
Yeah, which is why I would say that it is almost impossible that the current chief executive will be signing it, which means I probably do need to understand how that works, as I will be the other signature.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I have one other item on page 74. Yeah, we've got changing committee groups, changing the number of committees to reflect the changing number of councillors. At no point did I see we actually have itemised that the number of councillors changed as a result of the election.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
That probably should just be.
Well, it is there.
Yeah, somewhere.
Somewhere.
Did I miss it?
I've seen it somewhere.
I see it somewhere.
Yeah,
15,
yeah, on the previous
15 is
page.
somewhere there on the page, I think.
Wow.
It's on the section 5 at the bottom, underneath the graphic, the last bullet point. 50 councillors covering 29 wards.
What page?
Page 73.
Right, I don't have page numbers, sorry.
Well, you say you're only 60, but it's 57.
It has been a change in this
Okay.
year, though.
Yes.
I stand corrected. Thank you. Let us move on then to item 11, which is a review of our own terms of reference. Do I have any comments or suggestions or questions on these? That's a read.
Chairman, I don't know how complete we expect the comments under section 2 to be. For example, 2.1 says the Audit and Risk Committee will comprise 7 members in political balance. But those 7 members are also proposed, I believe, by the appropriate group leaders on that political split. So I don't know whether we want to add that or whether we just leave it as it's understood, i.e. that and proposed by the group leaders. So that sentence.
I will take guidance as to whether that is reflected elsewhere in the Constitution. I suspect that might be, and then each of the committees, in terms of reference, have those. But
I can give advice on that. The Constitution does set out the fiscal proportionality of all council committees, but also it sets out the number on audit. On a few committees where there have been terms of reference, I mean, my own preference would be not to duplicate because the possibility of an error creeps in. So it's really up to you if you want to state it in the audit committee terms of reference, but the Constitution should cover it.
I don't think it's that important to bring it in here. Under 2.3 though, the chair and vice chair will be appointed by the full council annually. It's not clear that it will be obviously from the 7 members who are on the committee. Just it wasn't. I suppose it would. I think we'll assume it's covered elsewhere.
Assume it's.
Leader, will you take that?
I'll take that away.
To consider.
I'd also have to double check.
Yeah.
You probably appointed your chairman and vice chairman in your first meeting of this committee rather than full council doing it.
I believe.
Or is audit a special case?
After the elections, when all the.
So we were allowed to put a proposal in for chairman and vice chair of all committees, and we do with a star and a hash.
Yeah.
But the actual formal appointment of the chairs and vice chairs is done in the first session of each of the committees rather than by full council. Yeah, it's a guide for the council rather than what you're
So
doing.
that may need to be amended in its language.
We're pretty sure it will do.
Yeah, noted that.
Thank you. Councillor Davison.
I feel that the audit committee needs to have a slightly stronger quorum. Currently it's set at just 3, less than 50%. I think the role which the audit committee has, I would feel uncomfortable if it's just been reduced to 3. And I would propose 4. You should be able to get at least 4 people around.
I'm happy to second that.
I think that's a good move.
I think we will make that for a recommendation.
Yeah.
I have just one, if I may, on page 83, 3.113. This is more a point. To review and make recommendations to full council on the financial regulation and contract procedure rules. It doesn't there say that the frequency with which we must do those. Last committee we approved the financial regulations, and then that went to full council for approval. The contract procedure rules, I'm not aware that we have reviewed those since March 2022. So that's 18, 19 months ago. So I was just posit whether we should have an annual review, or is that perceived as unnecessary?
Well, I think we do an annual report. As well, we are obligated to do an annual report. Would that not necessarily include some of the other reports or reviews which we had to undertake as part of our role?
If it can be explicit, I think there's an ambiguity at the moment as to how are we complying with, for example, that contract procedure rules. Technically, yes, because there's no timescale put here, but part of me feels it should be part of an annual process. If there are no material changes, there are no material changes. That's fine.
I'll take it.
I just wanted to flag that because your committee rules are Part 3, Appendix 1 of the Constitution, anything that you're saying here has to be recommendations to the Standards Committee.
Yeah.
So, for example, the section on quorum is set at 3 in the Constitution in clause 2.6 in Part 3. So they need to amend that. And equally, the section regarding 7 members in political balance is Part 2.1 in the same section. So the Constitution needs to be amended to achieve what you're doing. Not saying it's obviously impossible, I'm just saying there's a next step.
Yeah. Understood. Thank you for that clarification. Or could we suggest to them then making those more annual, and I think that'll make it easier. Something I'm quite keen on. We have a large number of responsibilities that we're tasked with here, and I would kind of like to see a grid that says the responsibilities, and when we have sort of fulfilled those, at what point, so we keep ourselves on track. So at times I think there's some things that we might miss inadvertently or are covered under another heading.
Chairman, that could be something that I could actually incorporate into the Audit Committee annual report each year, is the grid with all the responsibilities and when we actually looked at them.
That would be very helpful. Perhaps you and I can go offline and then work out something to present to the committee.
And Mr. Chairman, if you are amending the Constitution to do that, the grid that licensing have in the sections before in the Constitution is exactly the sort of thing I think you're after for audit, where it lists annually the responsibility, who's responsible and when it happens. Licensing have that. I really can't see why you shouldn't either.
That would be helpful. Thank you for that pointer. Good. Any other things on the terms of reference?
No. So the recommendation is that we're going to put these comments to Standards Committee. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. So moving on to item 12, Audit Committee Annual Report, where we're invited to note the annual report that is there. Do I have an officer who's going to just lead us through that, or?
It's a report that I draw up every year, just purely to give the committee an overview of what we have looked at over the year, and anything that needs to be sort of highlighted that may have come out that's out of the norm from what we normally would have looked at.
Does this report go to council, or is it to us?
It would go to council as part of the audit minutes.
Fine. As part of the minutes. Okay.
Yes.
My sense was a lot of this was from, as it were, taken from the minutes.
Yes, it has been taken from, literally taken from the minutes. And as I say, I basically just do a list of everything we've looked at, but then I will bring out anything that's come out that is not the norm. So any issues that we've highlighted and things like that, I'll put in.
Okay, I mean, I think, what is this, is this due to go to committee in the next, to council in the next meeting?
Yeah, it will, yes, well, the actual report doesn't go to council. It's more a case of, obviously, our minutes go every
Understood.
every council, our audit minutes go, and so they will have seen all this. This is just a more of a an overview for the audit committee of exactly what we have discussed and things that have come out of our discussions. And it also means that if anybody actually says, you know, do we do anything, or what do we do?
List.
There's a list.
We've got a little bit of, rather than having to go through all the minutes, we've got a list, an overview of everything we've done in that year.
Well, thank you. With just one observation, page 87, the vice chair has not been updated.
Oh, has it not? I do apologise, Councillor Wicks. I will make sure that gets changed. It was.
She accepted, Kimberly.
Yeah, sorry about that. I will add that one in.
Good. Any other comments, questions from those? So can we note that annual report, please?
I only like to say how handy that is. It really is, isn't it? Yeah. You can just look at it as an overview of what you could.
It is, and it's touching, I think, on what we were referencing in the first one. If we then also had a grid that says, this is what we're tasked with doing, tick, this is how we've done it. And then we'll see, hopefully, where we've got
Quite good, isn't it?
So thank you, Kimberly, for putting this together. On to implementations of internal audit actions. Richard, are you going to take us through these next?
Yes, I will indeed. So first thing I think for the committee to note is the fact that Gail is not here tonight, so she is now retired. So at the moment, we have asked Southern Internal Audit Partnership to perform that role for us in terms of the client, which is what they do for Guildford and a number of other councils. So we will see how that works over the next few months, Chairman, before we review things. In terms of these reports, we do have Iona online with us, but I'm pleased to say that the items requiring attention is a very short list. Gail tried very hard before she went to get that down to a short list as possible. So there are only 3 items there basically requesting an extension. And again, very few items that are actually overdue in appendices 1 or 2. Happy to pick up any individual questions you may have, but hopefully the commentary that's given after the appendix should provide you with the update as to why those things have been delayed.
Good. Thank you, Richard. Before we address that, I think, I'd like to put on record certainly our appreciation of the work that Gail did over many years. I only knew her in the last sort of year or so, but everyone I've spoken to has spoken very highly of her. And I think we should sort of formally note that her contribution to the work of the council. And just building on that, Richard, you say that Surrey,
Southern Independent
are going to be sort of taking on the internal audit work pro tem, and they've been doing a fair amount of that anyway.
Yes.
Are you comfortable that the internal audit plan, sorry, I may be jumping ahead of myself here, that everything is going to be on track and that we're not going to be having to sort of change things or delay things because we haven't got there? Or if there are, can you highlight those to us?
Well, yeah, I think you're straying it into item 14.
Sorry,
That's fine. That's not an issue. So you'll see in item 14, it actually details that most of the work was being undertaken by the partnership anyway. I think it was only 20 hours of audit work that I think were down for Gail to actually deliver.
Yeah.
So I am meeting regularly with the partnership to make sure that those items are now picked up and prioritised against the rest of the work. So I'm assured about that. I'm not sure whether Iona wants to come into all.
No, just to support you, Richard, we're obviously in regular contact now regarding the progress of the plan. It is fair to say a number of adjustments have been made so far during the course of the year in liaison with Gail, and a number of other changes are likely to the throughout the remainder of the year within the systems that will be covered, but that's just due to changing priority and resource capacity at Waverley to service these audits. But again, I'll be in regular contact with Richard on the effects that such changes may have on the and possibility for the annual assurance opinion at the end of the year.
Thank you. On that, sorry, I've jumped ahead of that. So on item 13, there are basically three action points where extensions are requested. Did any member have any comments or questions? Otherwise, can we take those as being agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Sure, I would say it's nice to see the sun's just coming up in San Francisco.
I was thinking.
Now that's working from home.
We're very envious. So moving on to item 14, which I've already jumped into. Rich, I think one comment I would make is as you're thinking about the future of internal audit and the function evolves, that I think it's important that you keep the committee fully advised, and you get our okay on the process, because the internal audit is very much part of our responsibilities. And I think it's important that we are comfortable with whatever plan and personnel that you develop.
I totally agree, Chairman, and I'll keep you informed as best I can and involved along the way. The one thing I do like, particularly around Southern Internal Audit Partnership, is that their risk-based approach to the sort of audit planning process, which they've used at Guildford. So I know Gail did do a similar thing, but actually I'm impressed with the way they approach that. So I think that would be something you'd be interested in as we develop the audit plan for next year.
I certainly would, and I think the interface between the risk aspects and the audit aspects are critical in order to assess where is it that you should be looking and seeking assurance. Councillor Davis.
Keep on raising questions, hopefully not too silly. A concern, well, a simple question first, and then I'll go on to my concern. I look at the budget committed. Does the committed include what you've already spent, or is it what you're expecting to spend?
Those are the items where the work has been commissioned.
And therefore you're expecting to have to pay an invoice as opposed to what you've actually paid. Otherwise, you've got very little left.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. The concern which I've got is when you do an internal audit, two things: chasing and getting staff to respond. Having an internal manager like Gail is, to my mind, critical. And the next critical thing is, when there are recommendations, actually getting the action done to implement those recommendations. And again, that requires drive. It's all very well saying, oh, managers will recognise that they've got to do this. But unless to my mind, there's somebody pushing to make it happen, there is a big question mark about the completion. And I was wondering how, Richard, you're going to address those two concerns.
Yeah, I don't know whether Iona wants to comment about how that's done elsewhere. In terms of chasing up the outstanding audit queries.
Yeah. So in terms of how we do it, for all our partners, our clients, and it's how we would do it going forward in the interim basis for Waverley, is we do regular action tracking. We work on it'll be very similar to how Gail has always done it, in fairness. We will work on when the target dates for implementation are. We will send out emails to the responsible officer for those recommendations, for those actions, seeking confirmation that the action has been done. And if the action hasn't been done, the reason why it hasn't been done and what the revised target implementation date for doing that action is. We will report to you as a committee very much in summary form the medium and low priority actions that are overdue. For those that are high priority that are overdue, we'll give you a summary of what the observation was in the report, what the target date was, what the revised target date is, and the reason for that action having slipped. Very much along the lines of what Gail has always done for you, but perhaps in a little bit more truncated format. We won't go and re-audit and test that the action has been done. We will take it as read by the positive confirmation from the relevant manager. But what we will always do as part of the ongoing planning process for the subsequent year, for any area that had a limited assurance opinion or a no assurance opinion, we would revisit with the executive head or the director the need for either a full further re-audit or the need for a follow-up audit, which would concentrate on making sure that the management actions have been truly implemented. So perhaps a little bit of a longer explanation for you than you anticipated, but just to reassure yourselves as a committee, although we'll report it in a slightly more truncated form to what you've currently had, we will still be doing the action tracking for the management responses.
Good. And Iona, do we as the committee, and I guess myself as the chair, continue to have direct access to you and vice versa? Because I think
absolutely. And again, going forward, if we're to, obviously, Richard, as he said, is going to see how this arrangement goes. You as a committee need to decide if you're happy with this arrangement. So if we were to continue this arrangement into 24-25, we would bring to you the internal audit charter for the year. So currently, you've always had the annual internal audit charter from Gail as your head of internal audit. We would assume that head of internal audit role for you. And yes, we will very much have an audit charter that sets out the relationship between ourselves and Waverley and what we will be doing for you.
Well, we're jumping ahead of ourselves a bit there, but
you are
reassuring that from what you're saying. Thank you. Any other comments on item 14? So can I have a motion to note those contents of that report as that?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. On to item 15, fraud investigation summary, Richard. And Richard, in your remarks, if you could also address the wider issue that came out after certain allegations in Guildford, to give us as much assurance as you can that those issues, if indeed valid, are unlikely to manifest in Waverley.
Yes, I mean, so obviously, because I am undertaking a joint role, then I have reflected on the issues arising within Guildford to make sure that those things are obviously also occurring within Waverley. I think looking at your processes and procedures, they are, I think, far more up to date and B, robust than they were within Guildford, which is obviously a really good thing. I think things like your budget monitoring is actually first class, and I have commented on that to Rosie, so it's actually some of the best I've seen anywhere, to be fair. So, you know, that I think, again, gives you a real assurance about if there were those sort of issues happening, then that would be pretty quite quickly identified through the budget monitoring processes. I think in terms of some of the management arrangements and segregation of duties, again, I think you don't have any issues there either. I think the one thing that probably concerns me is around systems. So I think you use the same orchard system here for housing repairs as we do within Guildford. So I have asked, as part of the work that I and the team are doing around our main accounting work at Guildford, to particularly look at things like our feeder systems, including Orchard, and give us any recommendations around those. So I think once we've got that information, that's something which obviously we can look at to apply to Waverley as well, to see if there's any learning coming out of that.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the one area where I would say there was any concern from my point of view.
Okay. Any questions for Richard on that matter? Because obviously it was a potential problem, and I think it's an important one that we feel comfortable, and certainly the learnings is the important thing. Things happen, but how do you learn, how do you improve, and that's what I really want to have established.
In the report here, we see where 3 properties, recovery of 3 properties. Obviously, that's a fraud investigation. I don't know how this came about, how you found out what people were doing in tenancies that shouldn't have been there or whatever. But living in a small village, it's widely known where there are people not living in the houses they're supposed to be in. And I just wonder how you go about monitoring it, because it's one of those things. I mean, if you live in a small village, people will say, oh, well, you know, Jim doesn't live there anymore because he's living with his girlfriend down in whatever, but he's letting his friend so-and-so live there. Now, should we as councillors be reporting all these things?
Yep.
Do we know who's supposed to be living in those houses? We don't. We don't know who's supposed to be living in those houses, if they are the tenants of Waverley, do they? I mean, I don't know that Jim hasn't wandered off and Tim legally is a Waverley tenant now, that sort of thing.
Well, you can contact the housing department.
Yeah.
And ask them.
Yeah. I didn't
Because
know
they
whether
can be-
under,
Some tenants can be quite duplicitous. And they know how to work the system. So because if you live in a little village, as you say, people gossip, but if you live on a big estate
yeah,
and somebody moves out, some people don't care if somebody else moves in. They can sublet that house
Absolutely.
and move in to another property, but as long as the rent's paid, if they're a tenant, no antisocial behaviour, they haven't got a dog barking, they just keep the property nice, or the new subtenant keeps the property nice, nobody bats an eyelid.
No.
And they can have quite a plausible reason why they've moved in, or they can just say, I'm the new tenant.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite easy, and then Jose used to go out there and find these properties and reclaim them.
Yeah, I think it is a problem, but as I say, that without, as a councillor, knowing who is supposed to be in the property, we've got.
Well, you won't know.
No, you don't.
You won't.
You've got to actually make the inquiry then of housing Like, should Mrs. X have her husband back living here because she became a
But
single?
that's when you need to go to the housing department,
Yeah,
because you don't know if there's domestic
No,
violence
absolutely.
or anything like that.
no.
So it's worth just having a quiet word
Mm.
with either Mike Rivers or Elizabeth Donaldson.
But when I read this, I thought, oh, well, at least they have found 3.
There's probably hundreds of properties out there that have been defrauded
Yes,
over the years.
Yeah.
I worked there in the housing department for 17 years.
yeah,
And we knew as rent officers and housing officers, you've got to prove it.
mm,
And unless you've got the intel to do that, or somebody's going to come in and make a statement, you can't just assume
yeah, this is
that
the
it's
problem.
not right.
No, it is the problem, is actually getting somebody to put their name down and say that they 100% can categorically say that's what's happening.
And I guess some of these, may be incorrect rumours or whatever, but I think you're right. Talk to the housing officers, and I think our duty almost as councillors, whether it's looking after the value for money that for Waverley and for residents. 2, if we hear something to advise them, and then over to the officers to investigate, and as you said, there may be compelling reasons why something is the case. Is happening.
And even knowing which houses are still Waverley properties in your ward is quite a useful thing to have. Not necessarily who the tenant should be, but knowing if they are.
You can find that out
Yeah,
from
I
council
was going
tax.
to say, yeah.
But it's the same with succession of tenancy.
Mm.
Say Mr. Bloggs has lived there, the children have grown up,
Yeah.
his wife's died, he's the actual tenant.
Mm.
Then suddenly you'll get a grown-up child move back in. Oh no, but I've lived here for 10 years. No, they haven't. They've just moved in because dad's might die shortly and I want to succeed the tenancy.
Yeah.
So they have to prove that they've lived there for 12 months or more, bank statements, etc., in order to prove that they have got the right to succession. So it's worth, you don't have to be a snitch, but it's worth just speaking to somebody either in council tax, because they've got it on council tax records.
Okay.
If it's one of our properties.
Yeah.
And the same if you've got any observations that you're not sure about, speak to Mike Rivers or Elizabeth Donaldson.
I was pleased to see that we've actually done 3 because over the years you hear of so many of these incidences,
And when I look at this report, I would commend the work of the report officer. You can see what they're doing is reclaiming money that should be Waverley's, which can then be deployed for the benefit of the residents appropriately. And I would ask us therefore to note the report and with I think the observation that we commend
the officers'
work
work.
and activity. I think they've done a great job, and look forward to more. Well, one day I hope that there will be no fraud, but realistically, keeping people on their toes is good. Good. So, does the committee note this report?
Yes.
Thank you. Which brings us to item 16, which is our recurrent annual work programme. Which we generally just have a look at, and we invite you to note that. A lot of these are, I think, standard items. And just talking with Kimberly from earlier, I'd like to see in due course this added, some of the things like the RIPA report and others tying in with our terms of reference, so we clearly know when they're being addressed, and as I said, who the responsibility is. So we're basically looking at, for the next one, the March report, which is, I think, largely going to be an audit-focused report for that time of year. But clearly, I would hope for some significant progress on the risk management side as well. And looking at the internal audit side and the changes that we'll have there, it could be quite a lengthy meeting. Are there any observations, suggestions that members have on the work programme?
I think your suggestion of going through our terms of reference and making sure that each of those, there's a whole list, isn't there, of review,
Yes.
that they are appearing somewhere in the annual programme.
Yeah.
Because I think in the past, you're quite right, we've been somewhat negligent.
I wouldn't use the word negligent. I think that's.
So I'm quite harsh because I was the vice chair in the past.
I think what the issue is a lot.
Only during your
Some of the
time.
things that the specific, a report has to be
Yeah.
approved are quite clear. Others are, in terms of reference, are slightly more nebulous. And, you know, we probably covered a lot of them in general discussions, but it's identifying those and memorializing them is, I think, important. Good. We've got, I don't think we've got any matters that we need for the exclusion of press and public. So any other business from any members? Hearing none. I'd like to thank the officers for their reports and their attendance, and members likewise for their comments and questions. And at 8:25, I will